Hi, and welcome to The Mark You Leave, where we explore the entrepreneur's journey. My name is Alex Mejias. I am the founder and managing attorney at James River Law, and we're so glad that you joined us today. I'm very excited to welcome a guest today, Brandon Smith with Milestone Financial Solutions, and we're going to be diving into succession planning, buy-sell agreements, buy-sell insurance. And so very excited to kind of continue this topic that we started on a previous podcast, and now we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive. So if you're interested in learning more about how buy-sell agreements work, how buy-sell insurance work, then this is a great episode for you to tune in and listen. So Brandon, thank you so much for being here.
I am so glad to be here. Excited about the opportunity to dive in with you.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, let's, before we kind of dive into the subject matter, we'd just love to hear a little bit more about you, about your work and kind of how you got started. Can you kind of give us a little bit of an introduction?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm an independent financial planner. I've been doing it since 2015. I started working mostly in school systems, doing retirement benefits planning for teachers, and basically built up a business doing that for about 3 years. My senior partner and I actually decided to go independent in 2018 and focus on working with business owners and then entrepreneurs, mostly is really where our focus has been. So definitely have had a lot of experience in the business continuation space. Part of being an independent financial planner is we got to look at all the different components of somebody's financial world, right? So that includes their business, their life insurance, that includes their estate planning, which of course we got to have good relationships with attorneys like yourself. But then it also counts in the other parts of their life, like how much money are they going to be able to spend in retirement? How can they make sure that they don't run out? Things like that. So I help with all those different components, but mostly with business owners, and because of that, we have to focus on their major asset. And in most cases, that major asset is their business, and we got to protect it, make sure that it stays in their family or goes the way they want it to go.
Absolutely, and that makes a ton of sense. So in terms of can you give us a little bit more information about the types of businesses you work with in terms of like the different verticals, the size of the business? What does that look like for you in your business?
So we like to work with small businesses. So we've got one of the buy-sell agreements I actually just set up this week is for two guys own a swim coaching company together. They have some part-time lifeguards and coaches that they bring on over the summer, but they own the business together 50-50. And so they actually went through and did something we'll talk on a little bit later, but a cross-purchase buy-sell agreement. So that's on one end, your small business where they've got maybe 2 or 3 employees, all the way up to we've got a couple gas stations where I'm driving around doing enrollments, and that can tend to be a large project for us as well. But in most cases, what we're looking for is about 10 to 15 employees, small, closely held business where a business owner just needs some help.
Got it. So if that's you, if you are a business owner in that size, and that's a lot of the types of business that we work with as well, are those small businesses, privately held, closely held businesses that might have anywhere from 1 to 4 owners or partners that are involved in that. So that's perfect. So let's talk a little bit about just your general process and sort of how you begin thinking about this idea of business continuation or succession planning. And when someone comes to you and they're wanting to engage in that conversation, what does your process look like with them?
So a lot of it has to do with getting to know the person and what's important to them. A business is just a method of building an income stream for people's retirement. Of course, you can be a lot more passionate about it. There can be a lot more to it than just that. But ultimately, you have to look at it as, what is the goal of this business? Is it just to have the business and just to have the best pizza shop in town and you don't care necessarily whether you're making money? Or is it that, hey, we want to have the best pizza shop in town, but we also want to make sure that my great-grandchildren, their college is paid for? And so getting an idea of what is truly important to the business owner is the first step, getting to know that person, understanding what they've done so far, because sometimes people have done a little ad hoc planning every once in a while. They've written something up. They might have a holographic will that says their business goes to some person, and whether or not that holds up, that's not up to me, but it means that the person has given a little bit of thought, and I want to be able to dial in so that we can actually flesh that out and make sure that they have made those decisions beforehand.
And what kind of questions do you ask to kind of draw out some of these issues and flesh out? What are some of the things that you're looking for?
Well, one of the major things that I'll generally ask somebody, and this can kind of throw people off a little bit, but what happens if you die tomorrow? what happens to your business? Sometimes they'll have an employee that's really important to them. Occasionally, I've seen that actually with some of the organizations we work with that have salespeople. You can have one salesperson that basically brings in more money than the rest of your sales department.
Yeah.
If something happens to that person, your business might not survive. So getting an idea from the business owner how their business is made up. Sometimes it's the owner that's that key person, but not always. And so getting an idea of what pain points they have at this stage, really getting an idea of where their business is, what some of their concerns are. There are certain things that can be dealt with very easily. Sometimes they have an issue. Employees aren't staying long enough because their benefits aren't competitive. Well, okay, then let's see if we can get you more competitive benefits so that you can retain your employees. But a lot of it stems with just getting to know the employer, going over what their census is, seeing how many employees they currently have, getting an idea of the distribution of salaries throughout the organization, because that also opens up some other opportunities. You know, if you've got an owner making $1 million and the next best paid employee is making $50,000, then you're very limited in the benefits that you can add for that employer. So it just takes a lot of getting to know people. Usually there's about 2 or 3 meetings in the beginning before I'll actually come up with any real recommendations for a client. I like to get to know their accountant or their attorney if they have a good relationship with somebody, because oftentimes I can just have a 3-minute conversation with the accountant or the attorney, get the information that I need to move forward, versus going back and forth and asking people questions that they don't know the answer to. Like, just as an example, last week I spent about 3 hours with a client trying to find the tax ID number for a new business that he had set up.
Yikes.
We eventually had to call the IRS because he couldn't find it anywhere. He had he didn't have the determination letter or anything. So it was just one of those things where occasionally you've got to do that legwork up front, get to know people so that you can actually come up with a good recommendation for them.
Right. And so when we talk about succession planning, we're typically talking about a few different life events or events that can happen. I know you call it sort of business. What do you call it again?
I think about it as business continuation planning. So if you've got a business and you want to make sure that that business can continue to operate without you, you need to have a plan in place.
Right.
And it may include you selling that business over to somebody else, or it may just include you providing enough liquidity within your estate so that your children can take over the business. And maybe they don't have the knowledge to run it day one, but maybe you've got some planning done to where they can have time. And maybe on day 365, they can take over.
Right. Got it. And so there are other instances where you might want to retire, where it's not just about you necessarily dying, but you might be disabled. Yeah. Sometimes we see partners where someone is terminated, and you need to figure out what's going to happen if one of us gets fired or our minority partner gets fired. So there are a lot of different scenarios that can go into business continuation planning or succession planning, like we talk about. And so we try to think about when in our work, when we design like a buy-sell agreement, we really try to think about all of the potential events that can happen, the triggering events that can happen. And that's not even to talk about the other life events like divorce, bankruptcy, or other things, scenarios that could trigger a change somewhere in the business. We talk a lot about there are multiple ways of doing that type of planning. Sort of the cornerstone one that we look at, though, is this idea of the buy-sell agreement. Now, we talk about operating agreements where you can build some of that planning in. There are some other ways that you can do some planning if you're wanting to offer equity to employees or do an ESOP or other things. But what I kind of want to talk about today is the buy-sell agreement and some of the key components of the buy-sell agreement. And so one of the most important, two of the most important terms within the buy-sell agreement are the valuation method and then the funding method. So let's talk a little bit about valuation method, because I know that's something that you help your clients with or help them either get set up. So what are the different valuation methods that you see in buy-sell agreements, and which ones do you find effective for the different types of businesses?
So if you've got a closely held business, like that one I mentioned earlier, 2 owners, they just need to come to an agreement. Sure, you can go through and you can actually have a valuation completed. You can have an informal one done, and oftentimes you can get that very inexpensively based on some metrics like your earnings, cash flow, assets that you have on the books for your business, things like that. Usually they'll look at the last few years of your cash flow, come up with a formula, and they can basically match you against other businesses, whether it's in your area or just in your sphere, and come up with some comps and say, okay, looking at this, your range would be somewhere between 2 million and 3.5. And then if it's a small business, you can usually look at your business partner and say, hey man, let's settle on 2.5 million and let's each get 50% of the life insurance. Right. And one guy pays for the life insurance on the other one, and that's it. So it's very simple in those situations. You can also come to a handshake deal, which I have seen that happen, and it has worked out in certain cases where, 2 people start a business together, or again, it's a small, closely held business, and they just come to an agreement that at the end of the day, if we were to sell this business, $1 million is the value that we're going to settle on. So each of us is going to get $500,000 in insurance. If one of us passes away, the other one's bought out. He pays that $500,000 over to my wife or whatever, and we make sure that we're made whole. So those are kind of the simpler methods. Now, if you're going to do a formal valuation, usually I've seen those range anywhere from $8,000 to $15,000, and those are going to be for your larger businesses. Those are generally going to be if you're looking into like a merger and acquisition. You've got something that is more of like a C-corp or a larger corporation, where you've got a little bit more stock, potentially more owners involved. Situations where I've seen that is like with a large doctors group, something where you've got maybe 20 or 30 partners in the business, and nobody in there actually wants to be the one person who is handling the administrative burden. So in a situation like that, it makes sense for everybody to just say, hey, I'm a 5% owner in this doctors group, and for them to split the cost of making sure that a CPA is coming in. They're the ones who are liable for making sure they get the exact right number, and then everybody can go through and agree on it. If you got a smaller group, it's a lot easier for everybody to kind of come to that handshake. But if it's a larger group, I say go for the formal valuation. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that locking in that number is such a key part of it, because that really kind of is the number that that your family will or your estate will end up with, and locking in that value is critical, because if a key person, or if you're out of your business, the business might not have that value at the time that triggering event happens. Absolutely, and usually it doesn't go that way. You're absolutely right. If you lose a key person, and your cash flow gets reduced in half, your business valuation has just gone out the window. But if you've already locked in, whether it's business overhead insurance, which we can talk a little bit about, disability insurance, or even the actual life insurance, which will cover you in the event of your death or your key person's death or something along those lines. Now you have that money that comes in, gives you a liquidity event in the business, gives you some time to be able to either hire and train somebody else, or potentially to start selling off pieces of the business without having to do it in a fire sale, which is oftentimes what I hear about happening when people don't have that plan in place. A spouse inherits this business. They don't know how to handle it. Maybe they don't have the licensure to be able to handle it and actually run that business. And so they just have to sell it to the next person who comes across and says, hey, I'm willing to pay you $50 for this business. And you just take it. Yeah. Got it. So we do want to make sure we lock in that value. And I do think it's interesting how partners can just kind of agree on it. And typically, in our agreements, if it is that type of a handshake agreement, it's something that we will ask them to revisit every year. Yes. And make sure that they're kind of updating it. And, you can and so if this is something that you're doing and you want to try to figure out the value within your buy-sell agreement, you typically have like an addendum or an exhibit to the buy-sell agreement that has that
that agreed upon valuation, and then maybe every year, hopefully at least every year, but sometimes not. I mean, people forget or they miss out on doing this, but you're kind of keeping that number current,
right?
So that you're reflecting the current value, whether up or down of the business. I mean, I don't think you probably would want to go down, but if it needs to appreciate. So in terms of turning now to funding a buy-sell agreement, can you talk about the different ways that a buy-sell agreement can be funded?
Sure. So I guess the default is with company stock. So that's if you're a 50-50 owner in a business and you and I started a business together and then I passed away, now 50% of that stock technically would belong to my beneficiary, my wife, whatever. The problem is, how are you going to turn around and buy my wife out? Either she becomes the 50% partner, which I've seen that happen, and that can be a disaster if she's not the person to actually step in, because now she potentially has an equal vote with you, and maybe she doesn't understand our business. So I have seen that happen. That's kind of the default way. If you don't have anything else set up, that's what it's going to be.
Right.
And in those situations, the beneficiary could say, I don't care, give me my money, and you may have to liquidate the business to be able to come up with that money.
Right.
To prevent you from having to liquidate the business, you could borrow money. So you can always come up with a loan and go through and do that. Of course, that's costly, and you may not be able to get a loan that's large enough to actually buy out that ownership portion in the business. I have seen some employers try to do a sinking fund. So that's basically you just set money aside with the goal of eventually having that money there to complete a buyout, whether it's just a in-place retirement plan or something like that. The downside to that is you can't invest that money into your business. You can't use it for growth. You can't use it for anything. So it's basically dead money. I mean, sure, you can invest it and you could potentially earn, let's say, 6 or 7%, because we don't want to be too aggressive with that money, because God forbid something happens at the time that you need it and the market's down. So that sinking fund method is there, but in general, the cheapest way to do it is with life insurance. And not everybody's insurable, so that process does depend on everybody's individual situation.
Right.
But life insurance gives you the most leverage in buy-sell planning, I would say.
And just to kind of go back a little bit to the sinking fund, in that scenario, it would more likely be a stock redemption. It wouldn't be like a cross purchase, so the business is actually buying.
Yeah. So
stock.
That's usually what it is. You've got this sinking fund inside the business, and then the business is actually buying out that stock, bringing it back in. In general, I wouldn't recommend that unless you absolutely have to go that route.
Okay. Got it. And that just kind of highlights one of the distinctions too, in terms of like having a cross-purchase buy-sell agreement where owners are buying from each other. You can also have a redemption agreement where the business agrees in advance to pay the departing partner or owner a fixed amount. And so let's dive a little bit more into the life insurance, but I know that life insurance policy can be held even by the business or by each of the partners. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the pros and the cons of each approach in terms of like who should hold the policy and how some of those policy dynamics should work?
Sure. Yeah. So in its most simple format, what you're doing in a buy-sell agreement, going back to our business that we've started, I buy a life insurance policy on you, you buy one on me. Something happens to you, I know that I'm made whole. I now have this cash to be able to buy out your family, so they don't have the ownership interest and have that issue that we had mentioned. So that's in the most simple format. That's just generally you're seeing partnerships go that route. You're seeing where it's less than 3 owners. Or 3 owners or less. You can do it with 4, but it just becomes costly at that stage of the game because each person in the partnership has to own a life insurance policy on each other person for it to work. So once you get beyond, let's say, 3 people, it generally makes sense for you to go for that entity buy-sell. And in that situation, basically the business itself is buying these life insurance policies on each one of the owners or partners. And if they pass away, the business now gets that liquidity from the life insurance and has that money inside to be able to pay out the other owners or however they need to basically keep the business continuing and moving forward.
Got it. And so And the buy-sell agreement has, rules about how you can't just take that insurance money and just abscond with it somewhere. And so the key is that the buy-sell insurance is the funding mechanism, but there are obligations
You need that agreement
within the buy-sell agreement. So it's not really enough to just go out and buy the buy-sell insurance, because without the buy-sell agreement, your partner might get a payout, but they might not have any obligation to actually pay you for your estate, for your share.
And it hasn't happened with any of my clients, but I have heard of things like that happening. It's very frequent because it's pretty easy to get the buy-sell life insurance. You just buy a life insurance. You can buy a life insurance policy on anyone you have an insurable interest on. So your children, somebody you're working with. There was years ago, some of the large tobacco companies were buying life insurance policies on a lot of their employees because they can. And so there's just lots of different components out there to look at. But yeah, and keeping things simple, that original buy-sell of just I buy the life insurance policy on you, you buy it on me. That's kind of the basic format. Then outside of that, like going back to the doctors groups, you can look at where there's a larger entity that's actually purchasing one policy on each one of the partners. So that can be a cheaper way to do it versus buying 10 policies on each different person. One of the other things that can be done in an entity is you actually can change out the insured. Now, it's not something that's very easy to do always, but most policies actually have a little loophole where, let's say I wrote the original policy on you and down the road you come to an agreement with somebody else who's going to buy you out and buy out your 50%, and now they're going to become my partner. I can switch as long as they're insurable. They have to be in good health, but I could switch where that life insurance policy that I've been paying for on you now can switch over to that other individual. And so you do have the ability to do things like that as well, but it doesn't always work out because sometimes people are different ages, different health classes, things like that.
That's really interesting. And then in terms of like the business, if you have like a small business, what would you say, like if the partners say, well, yeah, that sounds great, but I don't know if I can personally afford to like pay a life insurance policy. What are the options there in terms of like who actually kind of pays those premiums and how that works from like a compensation and tax perspective?
Got it. Yeah. So if you're a subchapter S, you can actually just pay it out. Then you don't have to. You can basically take it as an owner's dividend and pay the premium right from the business, and just at the end of the year, whatever the total premiums were, you can write that off as a income to you, but you don't actually have to pay like the Social Security, Medicare taxes on that. So if you want to go that route, usually that's the way we'll have people do it. Of course, on the corporate, you can just pay it out of the business account. But at the end of the day, you don't want to tax deduct the premiums that you're putting into the life insurance policy. And that's very important because you want to get a tax-free death benefit at the end. Okay. And the way insurance policies work, if you deduct the premiums, then the benefit is taxable. So you always want to pay taxes on the premiums because the real benefit of a life insurance policy, or really any policy, is coming back with that tax-free benefit on the back end.
Yeah, that's such an important consideration. Something that we always talk about at James River Law is like, what are the tax consequences of what we're doing?
Yeah.
A lot of attorneys sort of they just say, well, talk to a CPA. I don't know if the questions come up about tax, and particularly with like putting together LLCs, but there are multiple partners when there's this whole tax code of partnership tax that you really need to consider. So if you're out there, particularly if you're an attorney, please don't forget about the tax side of things. Always be thinking about that side of it. I would like to kind of go back to that though. Can you share a little bit more about just so that I understand in terms of the taxability of the
owner's dividend, or
exactly. So were you saying that the business shouldn't take a deduction on it?
You don't want anybody to take a deduction on. So the way that you would want to do it and structure it, especially if you're doing that cross purchase buy sell, and that's simplest format. Business owners who get paid a percentage of their profits at the end of the year, they have the ability to either take it as salary, or they have the ability to take a portion as an owner's dividend. So when you take an owner's dividend, you don't have to pay your payroll taxes on that portion. So you do have to pay some self-employment taxes, and you got to make sure that you follow a ratio.
We're talking about an S-corp though
right
now, right?
This is an S-corp.
Okay,
yeah,
so let's make that distinction.
Yes, yeah. So this is an S-corp pass-through entity. You have the ability to take a portion of money out of your business and use that as compensation for yourself without having to pay that Medicare and Social Security tax on it. So I wouldn't say do that for all of your income whatsoever. There have been plenty of people who do that and then they get audited and talk to your accountant. It's not the best way to go, but at least for life insurance premiums, especially for something like this, it would make sense on a $1 million policy on a 40-year-old, you're looking at maybe $70 a month if they're in decent health.
Okay.
Especially on a term policy, which for most businesses, you're looking at something that is a temporary protection need. Now, there are permanent protection needs and situations where it makes sense to go in a permanent direction on the life insurance. But usually what we've been using is temporary protection, whether it's a 10-year or 20-year period. One of the downsides to that, of course, is at the end of the 10-year or 20-year period, you no longer have the life insurance and your health may have changed. That is solved by going with the permanent insurance. But sometimes you want to have the flexibility. And having a 10 or a 20-year period where we know, okay, we're protected and hopefully in 20 years we'll be in a totally different position in this business to where it's not just going to be you and I. We're going to be in a totally different, more corporate situation. We're going to be much bigger, things along those lines. So
got it. So what if you're not taxed as an S-corp? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in that case, then you just if we're C-corp and we're not, anything else is generally going to be passed through, right?
Right. So if you're just a disregarded entity.
Yeah. So at that situation, the business is just going to pay the premiums. And it's just
considered as
a portion of portion of the
but
overall.
You do pay but you will end up paying that self-employment tax on that. So that is an important consideration to understand that you need to include that in your taxable income. And so
you want to show, if you're doing that, you just want to show the total amount that you've paid in premiums to your accountant at the end of the year and make sure that they count that as part of your owner's dividends if you're doing a payout. If it's corporate, then it's just a line item on the corporate expenses for the year.
Right. So just I know it's a little bit in the weeds, but we do want to make sure that folks are really considering the tax implications. Obviously, talk to your CPA. Hopefully this conversation has just highlighted the need to make sure that you understand how this works from a tax perspective. The only other part about the insurance that I kind of want to talk a little bit about is, and this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but is do these policies or do some of these policies actually have a cash value? And how does that impact the valuation of the business?
Yeah, so they can. And that's that term versus permanent. So very high level, term is temporary protection. So you actually are defining the term that you're going to have insurance protection. So it can be 1 year. You can have something that's called an annual renewable term where you basically qualify for based on your health one time. And then every year they say, hey, the price is going to be raised by 10%. Do you want it? And you don't have to qualify with your health again, but the price is going to increase every year. Then they've got 5-year, 10-year, 15, 20-year. At the end of that temporary coverage period, your coverage is gone. Now, you do have the ability to get a permanent policy. So permanent policies, people may have heard of whole life insurance. So that was the original type of permanent policy. I think they even had it back in the Roman times. They had some form where you put a certain amount in and you know exactly what your payout's going to be. There's not really it's just a black box of I pay in X amount every year and I'm going to get Y at the end of it. In the 1980s, after the computers just became a lot more available, they started calculating values more frequently in these life insurance policies, and they came out with a few different flavors, I guess you could say. And so now for businesses, generally what we'll use is something called variable universal life insurance. The idea behind that is it gives you more of an investment feature, like that cash value, where you have the ability to borrow against it if you need it for business liquidity. And also you have the ability to build up that cash, which does become an asset of the business, which in terms of a buy-sell, somebody passes away, that cash inside of the life insurance policy is an asset of the business, and it is something that's counted in the valuation. So that would be another thing. Talk to your CPA about it if it applies to your situation. But the value of that cash is it kind of can work like that sinking fund, but you still have the death benefit. So what we'll use it in certain situations, if people want to have something that can potentially serve as a quasi-retirement plan for them down the road, but also self-complete and make sure, hey, if I pass away before I get to age 65 and my business gets to where I need it to be, everything I want is still going to occur,
right?
Because I've taken care of that back end planning on the life insurance side. The cash value part of it, it's just icing on the cake. You're not going to buy a policy unless you want the death benefit, because ultimately you're probably going to do better if you're just investing in an S&P 500 index fund or whatever. You heard it here from me. The life insurance, the real benefit is the fact that you get some tax benefits on the investments. So you put after-tax dollars in, the money grows every year without you having to pay taxes on that money, and then you can actually access it without paying taxes if you do it in the form of either a loan or a withdrawal up to your basis. So it's a tool that can be very useful, but a business owner really has to have that excess cash flow to where, hey, I want to set something up to where I want to be putting some money away for long term, but I don't really know where to go, and I don't need access to this today or tomorrow. Because in those situations, you're going to want something that's a lot more liquid. The big thing with life insurance, especially on the permanent side, you're not going to really be able to get your cash back out of it for a while unless you're getting into some really high-level policies. And they do exist. There's corporate-owned life insurance where you get access to all of your cash value right away. But in general, you're looking at about $50,000 a year in premiums for something like that.
Wow. Okay. So just want to, again, thank you for going into that. I think I just want to give folks the idea of like just the breadth of all these like different types of policies that are available. And it sounds like that would be something more that's sort of like an ancillary strategy. If you have other places that you're maybe investing cash or investing in the business, and then you have the resources available to get a more expensive policy that have these like added benefits, but making sure you're achieving the primary objective, which is making sure that like the death benefit is there.
Yeah, that's definitely the starter. You always have to. Otherwise, it's not the best thing in the world. Life insurance is a really useful tool that can do a lot, but it's not the end all be all. It's not the only thing you should have in your toolbox. There are a lot of other things that in specific situations are so much better.
Right.
That being said, it does give you the ability to sort of complete your plan. And you know that because you can even throw, and I have had this happen, where you can put a disability rider on a life insurance policy where if you're unable to work, whether it's in your job specifically, and certain life insurance companies have different criteria basically. So for me, technically I could do my job if I was in a wheelchair, but there are people who have jobs that they wouldn't be able to. So they will actually look at what your job is, and if you can't do that job based on a disability, they will pay for your life insurance premium for a specified period or up for the rest of your life. And so I've actually had life insurance policies that I've set up. I had a 45-year-old woman who had a stroke just from stress, and she's never going to be able to work again. Her $500,000 policy is paid up for the rest of her life. And it was it was a term insurance policy, but because of the disability that she had and the rider that we were able to have on her policy, we were able to switch it into a permanent coverage. Now she's got $500,000. It's like she planted a flag. She's got $500,000 that's going to her family no matter what happens.
Okay.
So there are some things out there that you can add to these policies, but in most cases, it all depends on, do I have somebody that needs me to provide them with income, or does somebody depend on me?
Yeah. And that's just highlights, I think, the importance of this whole process is that when we talk about entrepreneurs and the journey of entrepreneurship, you've worked your whole life. You've sacrificed. Your family has sacrificed. You've just poured your heart and your soul into this business. And it is something that you want your family to be able to also benefit from for not just during, that period of time where you're actually working in the business, but beyond that, because the life of an entrepreneur is hard. Yeah. It requires a lot of sacrifice. It's time intensive. It's stressful. Yeah. It's stressful on your family. You could talk to all of our wives and they know how stressful it is, and they're stressed out all the time too. Yeah. And so you want to make sure that that you're preserving that wealth, and you are kind of, like you said, like planting that flagging, making sure that no matter what, your family is going to be taken care of. And that is one of the beauties of entrepreneurship, is that you do have some of that ability that you might not have if you work at a job and you're getting a salary and you sort of access to like the basic company benefits that are there. You might not have this like plethora of options to really do some planning for your family and really take something that might even be not the biggest business, but like that can actually provide a ton of value down the road. So definitely want to highlight that, and that is something that we talk a lot about. One of the things that within our firm, we serve a lot of different types of businesses. We have clients that own restaurants, that own plumbing businesses, that own digital agencies, that are athletes, artists, musicians. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about how, when you're thinking about planning and insurance or these like different types of buy-sell valuation methods or whatever, wanted to just hit on some of the big categories of the folks who might be listening to this. So if you're a restaurant owner, like how might you think about some of these issues?
Well, the big thing as a restaurant owner, same sort of deal where we've got businesses all over the space. And one of the biggest things for restaurants, of course, it's keeping consistent, really good employees. But usually you've got one or two people in there that they know all the recipes. They're the ones that they know how to make the food. And if you go in there on a Tuesday night and Dave is sick, your pizza's not going to taste the same way,
right,
and you're going to know. So what we've done with a lot of small restaurants is we have actually set up key man insurance planning. So just to where that, again, it goes back to that business continuation. And that doesn't always need to be $1 million policy.
Sure.
Yeah.
And key man also applies to women too.
Yes. Key man. Yeah. Key person. Key person. Yeah. Key person insurance. Yeah. Yes. Good catch. So yeah, key person insurance can be very valuable. And sometimes that's just $100,000 policy.
Yeah.
And it could be a temporary policy, or it could be something where the business owner actually says, hey, look, I want the death benefit here.
Yeah.
But the cash value is going to be for you if you stick with me for a while. And that's something you can do. It's called golden handcuffs. It's another strategy that's really cool where somebody can stick with you for a while and then they get all the cash value of this life insurance policy as this big payout at the end of 10 years or whatever. So that can be a really good add-on benefit that you can actually exclude certain employees from. So it's something where if you really have one key person that you really want to reward, you can use that as a tool as well. And if something happens to them, you've now got this money to go out and hire yourself a Michelin star chef. So in terms of restaurants, the biggest thing is protecting the most important employees that your business cannot run without.
Right.
Oftentimes, at least in our situation, servers they kind of come and go. There's a lot of turnover on the kind of front end employees, but the management, those people generally stay for a long time. So there's a lot of planning. Once somebody's been with a restaurant for a while, the owner wants to be able to step away. You don't build a restaurant because you want to spend every single day and every single hour there. You want to have people that you trust that will actually take care of it for you. And so usually it stems around planning around those people.
Yeah.
And of course, being able to reward the business owners and protect the family. But a lot of times what I've found is they want time. They want to be able to actually like have a life outside and know that their business is taken care of even if something happens to Dave.
Yeah.
And so going through and doing a little bit of planning on the front end can take care of a lot of that.
That's great. What about if you have like a service business, like you're like a plumber, HVAC repair, or some other type of business where you're servicing equipment or things like that? Is there any special considerations for that?
Well, one of the things I would say in those situations, usually you are the business in those situations. So life insurance is important, but in those, I would say disability insurance can be even more important in those cases. Of course, the life insurance, let's say you're a plumber and you have no employees. So the life insurance is just the same life insurance you should own as an individual to protect your family in that situation. It's not necessarily that you have employees that are dependent on you. But if you get hurt and you can no longer go out and do your job, you've got nothing else coming in.
Yeah.
So that's one of the pieces of business continuation planning that we want to look at. And in general, it's about 1% to 2% of what your overall earnings are to ensure your overall earnings. So it's another thing where it's relatively inexpensive, but as long as you're working with somebody who has your best interest at heart and they're trying to find what is out there that can work well for you, it's so affordable to sleep well at night that I wish more and more people did it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about if you're sort of a professional service business, like a law firm, an accounting firm,
financial planner?
Financial planner, yeah.
So I can tell you a little bit about what we've done at Milestone. So my business partner and I do have a buy-sell agreement. He's a lot older than I am. So going back to that life insurance not working for everybody, we looked into it, and it just wasn't going to be something that was affordable for me to be able to purchase life insurance on him. So in our situation, we kind of have a hybrid model where we, in a way, have a sinking fund set up for his portion. He bought a lot of life insurance on me, and then we also have some disability insurance on me as well, where if something were to happen to me, he continues to earn quite a bit of money for the next 5 years, basically, while I can recover. And that gives him the ability. He'd probably just retire in most cases.
Sure.
But at the same stage, we have a lot of employees now. I just brought on 3 new young advisors that I'm responsible for. So if I'm not there to bring in new clients, meet with clients, do all the different things that I do, I want to make sure that at least there's some time for them to where they can find another job somewhere else. I don't want everybody to just, oh my gosh, something happened to Brandon and
Right.
now we're out of luck.
Yeah.
So that's why we've done a lot of that planning. And then I also have individual disability insurance on myself as well. So not only is the business taken care of, but if something happens to me, I'm in good shape.
Right, right. What about for folks who are they're single member companies, a sole owner, like when you have one owner?
Yeah.
What advice do you give to those folks?
It kind of goes back to that service where you're looking at like a plumber you are the business in
Right.
that situation. So you really need to make sure that your back end financial planning is really solid. So that's making sure that you've got an estate plan, because if something happens to you, your business is gone. It's not necessary. I mean, you could potentially have somebody else that could turn around and buy it. But
Sure.
in most cases, if you are the business and you're not there any longer, the business is gone, right? So I would say trying to ensure as many pieces of that as possible. So
Yeah.
your income and then also the actual asset or the value of the business, making sure that if something happens to you while you're driving to a job, your family doesn't lose everything.
Yeah, and we've seen before where you can use you can actually enter into a one-way buy-sell agreement if you have a key employee who might be interested in taking over the business for you, or multiple key employees,
Right.
where you can actually even get into a buy-sell agreement so that you have that benefit. You don't the buy-sell doesn't necessarily need to be between owners,
Right.
And you can even, and I don't know if you've seen like having just a complete third party enter into a buy-sell agreement. I think that's probably less common.
We've seen that as well. Usually what I see is either it's multiple partners or you've got, actually right now we're working on one for an HVAC company, and it's one guy has worked there for like 40 years and he wants to enter into an agreement to buy it from the wife who just inherited it after her husband passed away.
Got it.
And so it's one of those situations where they've got to come to a deal.
Yeah.
She's not fully in understanding of what the business is worth and everything. So they are actually going to have an independent valuation come in, because it's not something where there's that trust built that oftentimes you have in a partnership situation.
Yeah, and if you are a sole owner of a business and you want your business to continue, like this is definitely essential. You have to figure out who is going to continue it, who's going to buy it, or if you have children, that can also be an option. I'm trying to think of any other business. Have you done anything with creatives or folks that are athletes where they have like a little bit of like a non-traditional? I mean, these people are essentially small business owners.
Yeah.
How should those types of folks think about it?
So in general, it's the same thing. You want to protect your income. You want to protect whatever income stream, especially with athletes. That's extremely important.
Yeah.
So there are a few companies out there. Lloyd's of London is one of them that actually give specialty disability insurance policies. So you're not going to go through your standard company. For some creatives, you can, if somebody's a writer and they're just getting started, you want to go through and do an own occupation disability insurance. If something happens and they're no longer able to write the same way, they could hit their head and be totally fine otherwise. But when they sit down at the computer, everything's scrambled and now they can't write any longer.
Right.
You want to have coverage in place like that for situations like that. But on the athlete side, it is a little bit more challenging. Sometimes you have to go out and it can be a little bit more expensive, especially for the disability coverage. So there was a basketball player that I had worked with a couple of years ago, and we actually ended up having to go out to, this was the first time I'd ever done it, Lloyd's of London. They're a specialty insurer, and they actually had to go through and look at like all of his stats for the last few years during college, and this was right before he made the jump over into professional, and they looked at everything and they came up with like a valuation of his career, which was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. But that's actually how they do it. So they'll come in and they're not going to give you, if you're the next LeBron James, they're not going to give you $250 million in income insurance, but they'll say, hey, you know what? We see that you have the potential to earn that, so we might give you $10 million or something along those lines. You got to pay for it though.
Right.
So that's the negative part of it.
Right.
It works.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know that some professional contracts, like for instance in the NBA, the actual professional contracts will often have guarantees and that's a point of negotiation of like, is this contract going to be guaranteed in the instance of disability or death? And those can be negotiating points. So if you're at that stage,
absolutely.
Make sure your agent is aware of that. Okay, so we've kind of done a fairly deep dive here, which I'm really excited that we've done. But I do want to talk a little bit about, we've worked on some stuff together, and I've sort of shared at least one story before. But I want to talk a little bit about just some of the stories, that we've encountered and seen of how folks have got it right, folks have gotten it wrong, and where some of these things can go sideways. So maybe let's, I guess, start off with maybe some of the not so good stories.
Not so good, yeah. I got a great one actually. So this was a client that we're still working with, but this was well before my time. But it was a family-owned shoe store, and no buy-sell agreement was in place, and two siblings inherited the business. And one was a sister who lived in California, and the other's the brother who had been working in the business for his entire life. And they're now 50-50 owners.
Yeah.
So what basically ended up happening was the business ended up closing down because he had to come up with the money to buy his sister out. And so that was one of the non-success stories. And it's just because you have two kids and one's working in the business doesn't mean it's going to work out. And there's actually one situation that's a case that a good client of ours that we work with where the father had not done buy-sell planning. He passed away. His son, extremely smart, was able to take over the business and is doing an amazing job. However, this is like it's probably worth about $20 million.
Okay.
Sister's a 50% owner. She has a terrible relationship with the brother. She has equal votes in every single situation, and she gets the same 50% of profits. So it has really become a challenge for this son to be able to carry on his father's business and to do the things the way that his father had wanted to, just because that planning was never done in the first place.
Yeah.
So what I would say is if you've got kids, you want to talk it out with them and see who's really interested in it, because just like with a will, if you don't have one, you already have one, and it's not a good one.
Right.
So that's the way I would say in most cases. And I have seen it where it is funded correctly. Like we've got a really good client that father created this very successful manufacturing company, and out of his 3 children, 2 of them were interested in the business. So what he was able to do is actually fund his buy-sell correctly so that there was enough life insurance to where the 2 children, they get 50-50 ownership in the business. Actually, the eldest sister gets 51% and the son gets 49%, just because you got to keep them straight. But the rest of the money actually comes from life insurance to make sure that one sister who's not interested whatsoever, she's getting her portion. So nobody's getting left out in that situation. Then you're also not having somebody who doesn't really know what's going on being an equal owner in the business, because that just becomes a drag for everybody.
Yeah. And that also kind of speaks to the importance of the connection between like your estate plan and your succession plan.
Absolutely.
And making sure that those are connected, and you're actually thinking about who would you want to inherit this business, who needs to be taken care of when I'm gone or if I'm disabled. So that makes a lot of sense. What about some of the stories where things didn't turn out, where things turned out well?
Where things have turned out really well?
Yeah.
Well, one of the coolest ones actually is it's a client of ours that has been working with my senior partner probably about 50 years. And I've been doing this now since 2015, so I've been working with them since then. And back in 2018, after about 2 years of really trying to get two brothers to create a buy-sell agreement, one of them passed away and the other one passed away in quick succession. I mean, we're talking within 6 months. And because we were able to get that buy-sell agreement in place, fund it with life insurance, the business is still in the family. Both of their wives honestly thought they were rich and successful the entire time. Mm-hmm. When I talked to my partner about it, he goes, no, the business was basically just getting by. And then this huge influx of cash from the life insurance allows you to pay off all the debt, buy the building, invest in the business, bring on some more employees, get some better contracts. And now they're doing very, very well. And it's still a family-owned business. It's still stayed small, but bigger. Yeah. They got like 40 employees at this stage of the game. And it was something that if they hadn't gone through and done that planning, if my partner hadn't been on them, and that's one of the big things as a financial advisor, oftentimes we're the people who are actually bringing this concept to our clients because generally people don't have to pay us to see us. So that's one of the things, like with your CPA or your attorney, there's like an hourly rate in a lot of ways. So a lot of these small businesses will kind of call us when they've got a lot of different questions or, and so we then have a good network, and that's why I call Alex all the time when I've got questions on things. But having the person that you can reach out to say, hey, what are we going to do? Right. Can really protect your family. And in this situation, it did work out well. And other than that, we've got plenty of different small situations where that buy-sell agreement just being in place, it just gives you a track to run on to where now your family is not fighting over something. Because money, every time I see it, I mean, people inherit money and the claws come out. I don't get it personally. But at the same time, it happens over and over and over again. And you got to think a business can be looked at as a piggy bank, or it can be looked at as a cash cow, or it can be looked at as something that's an asset for the family. And each person's going to look at it in a different way. And it's your job as the business owner to figure out how you want the business to be set up so that you don't lose it all. Because like you said before, you're given, I mean, there's a lot of sleepless nights, there's a lot of studying, there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of long drives and phone calls and hard pieces of owning a business that are only worth it if you protect it. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that life is going to happen. Yeah. Like that's the one thing you can be sure of is that, you might not die anytime soon, but you might have a period of time where you're not able to work in your business because of disability, and eventually you will die. And so it's not pleasant to talk about, but it is something that you do need to think about and you do need to plan for. And particularly if you have children and you want to provide for them, you really want to make sure that this is something that that you've thought through carefully, right? And that you are, like you said, you're defining the terms of what this business will mean to the next generation. But I think it's amazing that you could have a business that is sort of struggling, even goes to very, not struggling, and just having an influx of cash. Walt Disney Corporation. That's the whole reason Walt Disney is the business it is today. Walt Disney had a $50 million life insurance policy on himself when he passed away. Interesting. Brought a ton of cash into the business. Okay. That is why Disney is the powerhouse that it is today. Because when you have $50 million that you're inheriting, or $1 million, $500,000, whatever. Right. You're inheriting that money with no taxes, no strings attached. If you're a good steward of that money, you can absolutely reach the next level within a business. Yeah. So it just has to do with having that plan in place so that you don't have an emotional 22-year-old saying, "Oh my gosh, what am I going to do with all this money?" Because actually, recently, a very successful financial advisor, somebody I looked up to for years, and my senior partner had been close friends with him. He passed away suddenly in his mid-70s. Financial advisors like to work for a long time. That's do lawyers. We just work until we drop. Just how it goes. Yep. And so he was in his mid-70s. He passed away. His daughter basically came out of nowhere, and she's 25. She's, amazing, so inspirational because she has really caught up and learned what she needed to learn to keep the business running. But it was because he had that planning in place to where she had time. She had about 2 years to really
just runway from the cash.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. To really be able to build up. And now she's a certified financial planner. She's passed a lot of the different exams. She's gotten a lot of experience. And sure, she's 26 years old, but at the end of the day, having that business behind you, it does give you a little bit of she's definitely got some knowledge and she's done very well. And it's just because she had that time frame versus if that insurance wasn't there.
Yeah.
She inherits this business. She's got a bunch of clients calling the phone.
Yeah.
She's worrying about paying the staff, everything along those lines. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You're just going to end up failing. And that's why a lot of businesses do fail, because poor planning.
Yeah. And I mean, that goes to, I mean, just the point that your business has goodwill attached to it.
Correct.
Your brand, your name, and like that goodwill takes time. And if and you sort of give the next generation the gift of like all of that goodwill that you're passing on, in addition to the cash, is that they're not having to start from scratch like you did.
Yeah.
And so when we think a lot about entrepreneurs, we talk about wealth. We also talk about legacy and leaving something behind that can maybe grow to even something that it wasn't during your lifetime. And I selfishly always hope that one of my daughters would come into the law firm. They've all said no so far, but if you're all listening to this, please reconsider. But it is something that when you think about the impact that you can have as a business owner, putting in a plan like this can actually really create an exponential impact.
Yeah.
So that your business really outlives you in a way that is just even beyond what you were able to potentially accomplish on your own. Because over time, there is some type of magic that happens with businesses that the longer your business is around, the more good things happen, the more goodwill. Assuming that you're doing a good job,
right?
And you're not
that's the
screwing
thing.
people over.
Do the right thing for people, and
right.
it'll pay forward. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so that is critical. This has been an incredible conversation. I hope that anyone who's listening or watching this has been able to kind of obviously learn something, but also learn how important it is to talk to someone like you, to come see us about a buy-sell agreement. Brandon and I work together. I know you work with other attorneys as well, and so this is a really critical part of any entrepreneur's journey. So if you're interested in learning more about this, I'm sure that Brandon would love to talk to you. I would love to speak with you about the buy-sell agreement, your estate plan, any of that. We at James River Law would be happy to do that. So Brandon, how can people connect with you?
My website is milestonefinancialsolutions.com. We've got a contact us tab there. Phone number is listed on the website. We're licensed in most states, so we're able to work outside of Virginia. It's not limited to just that. And more than happy to work with people from all walks of life. Like I said, we are specializing in business owners. That's really where a lot of our focus is, and we're happy to work with people.
That's great. Well, thanks so much again for being here. Really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Please do visit our website, jamesriverlaw.com, and follow us on all of our socials. And we'll post some links in the show notes to Brandon's website and to our site if you're interested in learning more about any of these topics. And thanks again, and join us next time.
Cool.